Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Tried Before. This time, DS9 season finale in the hands of the prophets. Yes, it's in the hands of your prophets, us. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm overstating whether we're your prophets or not. But if you want to find some prophetic things, maybe pathetic, empathetic, sympathetic, but always funny, check us out on Facebook. It's All Been Tried Before. Join the group. Get in on the stuff. Laugh along with us. Laugh at us. Laugh with us. It's All Been Tried Before on Facebook. And now, get into the season finale. It's not our season finale, but it's the DS9 season finale in the hands of the prophets. And It's All Been Trekked Before.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Trekked Before. Your regular hosts are here.
This is Steven.
And by leave of the prophets, Keith.
Well, this isn't whether this show's any good or not is in the hands of the prophets, so we won't blame them. Jimmy-Jerome here, and we're here to talk about this literally explosive episode, the season 1 finale in the hands of the prophets. First impressions.
Sigh.
Why are you sighing?
The explosive part.
Don't worry, it was just a school. At least nobody was in it. But we'll get to that. First impressions.
Well, now the audience doesn't have to keep tuned in anymore. They know that there's no one's in the school, so we can just roll the credits at this point.
I'm sure that's why they're listening to this. They haven't watched the episode. They're just tuning in to see what happens to the school.
Now they know there's a school in it. All right.
Spoilers.
Actually, I guess my first impression was I was a little. Well, at first, I was amused that it was going to be a Keiko episode. She had returned. Because of the attention we have been giving it for a while now. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh, they gave her something to do. And of course, it seemed a little tedious at first. I mean, not her presence, but just this religious, religion in schools debate, especially the way it took shape.
Yeah, but I think it was a lot fresher when this episode aired. It may seem annoying to us now, but that's just because we've been dealing with it for 30 years.
Yeah, I would say that we've been dealing it for longer than that, honestly. I mean, even at the time, I think it would have been, right. But anyway, I think it ended up being a lot more enjoyable than I first expected. And really only because of the way that it moved a few things along. And I would say some of the performances that some of the characters turned in and.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that too. I start off I'd start off like, hey, cool, Keiko's here. And then Louise Fletcher, wow, right off the bat, boom. But yeah, it did slip a little into, from the headlines you guys were referring to. I thought the journeys the characters went on were interesting, even to the point that I didn't like some of the characters, which I'll get into later.
Good.
Some of the ways they were made me like them a little less for a little while, of course. And it made me like some of them more. Yeah, I thought it was a good episode.
I think it's perfectly okay to not like characters on Deep Space Nine, even main characters, because some of them aren't. I mean, this show gets more complex than the original or Next Gen in terms of the character development and the makeup of the people. We'll talk more about that as we go. My first impression, I really liked this episode. And I know part of that is because this kicks off some things that will be followed up upon, unlike other Star Treks where it's like, here's the adventure, we're gone. Bareil and Wynn, the two Vedics in this episode, will both be in many episodes over many seasons. Like, they're not one and dones, So the fact that I know that, I'm aware of that, I'm aware of where their arcs are going, to me, that feels like the beginning of the journey here. Whereas I could see, if I did not have that foreknowledge and was just trying to take this on their own, I think I'd still find it an enjoyable episode, but I'm not trying to have confidence that it would mean anything. Because the Bareil Wynn, honestly, my alternate episode, I'm going to spill it now. If this was another episode of Star Trek, a Next Generation or something, I think where this ends is Wynn kills Bareil, Wynn becomes Kai, we never see her again. And that's the story. Whereas instead, we're going to go through season 2 of the two of them duking it out in the election. We're going to go through a political campaign. And I mentioned in the chat, I'm excited that Deep Space Nine got to the religion, because the religion is one of the great elements of it, but politics is an even greater element of it. And this episode was more politics than religion. As much as it had a religious overlay, it got into the politics, and that made me very excited. So I was like, yep, this is the DS9 I know and love. I'm glad we're here. I'm excited. Not that there won't be duds in season 2 or 3, but there won't be as many as Next Gen. And I don't think there's duds really in the later seasons the way there are in the other Star Trek. So, yeah.
All right. Well, roll credits. We got to the alternate episode.
No, I just felt like pointing it out there that this is the way it would have played out on another Star Trek series. And I'm very excited it's not the way it played out.
That was almost my alternate episode, but I ended up going with they actually kill a bunch of the kids. And then it turns into a Sandy Hook thing where Louise Fletcher's character is like, no kids were these are all actors acting like their kids got killed. And it turns into get ripped from the headlines.
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine if Jake Sisko had been killed in the bombing and Benjamin's reaction to it?
Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah. Or more likely at a show like this, it would be Nog that died.
Right.
And Quark and Rob's reactions to it. But still.
Yeah, I'd be really bummed if Jake did because I loved the way he was like, who is this crazy lady? She's stupid, essentially, is what he was saying. And I was like, yeah, I pretty much agree.
I mean, speaking of Nog, because I just mentioned him, where was he? This is a school episode. He's nowhere to be seen.
He was the puppet master all along.
That's why he was limping down the promenade at the end. And then he started walking straight.
Class, like usual.
If you look at the DS9 IMDb of how many episodes each character had, Nog is the most frequently reoccurring character. He was only in 3 or 4 episodes of season 1, which is the least he'll be in any season. He's in a lot more as the show goes on. But it did feel odd to me to not have him in this, considering the subject matter. I missed him. I missed his presence.
Yes. Alternate episode, Nog Girl. Or would it be like Nog Rig? Glurg? Yeah. I don't know.
I got there.
Thank
I
you.
got you.
So, to the beginning of the episode, O'Brien likes the sweet, the natural sweet or whatever. And Keiko's like, it's too early in the morning. But clearly O'Brien loves his morning popsicle or whatever it is. Not frozen, whatever it is. Lollipop. And he's going for his big, I think they called it Janja on a stick, John something.
Yeah, something like Jum or Jum.
Yeah, it gets mentioned again down the road, but I can't remember the name exactly of the sweet. Looks disgusting, but apparently it's like a sap or like a, something sweet. And in this conversation, Keiko is revealing how jealous she is of Miles's work wife, Neela, played by Robin Christopher, who we talked about last week.
Yeah, is this a fun scene for those two, or is it a bad scene?
It's a bad scene because she's like, "Oh, just keep on your toes, Mr. O'Brien," and it's like, "No, you're not. You're fishing to make sure he's being good."
Well, yeah, I can see why you would say that it's not. I mean, that it's. I mean, in real life, it's not really healthy to do things like that. But I think for the purpose of what they're doing, this was supposed to be kind of a fun.
Right. That's where I kind of landed. Like, I know we're supposed to be fun, but it still feels like it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I never dug deep into the relationship in my first viewing, but the other Star Trek podcast listen to The Greatest Gen, and they're doing DS9 as well. They talk a lot about how bad the O'Brien's marriage is. Every time we see them, they're fighting and at odds, and she's frequently gone for long periods of time. And I never got that. I just took them for granted. They were a happy, stable marriage. And now, I mean, it seems like they're on the verge of falling apart every time we see them.
I will say, as the episode goes along, as Keith alluded to earlier, Keiko gets to do more than we really got to see her do before, or at least more interesting to me. So, and then I feel like they're later in the episode, they're a real couple. They feel like a real couple that's together and united. Especially, I think, when O'Brien goes to beat the crap out of somebody or whatever. Or gets
He's
really
just
mad.
The vendor, the Jum vendor.
Yeah,
he's just trying to make up for earlier when there are doubts about him.
But I think so far this is my favorite Keiko and my favorite Keiko O'Brien episode.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, they come together once she's under threat.
Right.
It does make me regret that Rosalind Chow turned down the offer to be a main character on the show because I feel like we could have developed her, and instead, I think the most she's ever going to season is 3 or 4 episodes. Like, it's not going to get any better than what we had in season 1. She's just never around. And it's disappointing, but I mean, in the final 2 seasons, she's only in 2 episodes. I think she's in the season finales of the final 2 seasons. That's it. So it's like, okay, I guess she's here, but
you're starting to
the vendor that you mentioned was played by Michael Fairman, best known for Mulholland Drive, Cagney and Lacey, Dead Silence, 13 Days. He has 154 credits. He's recently been in an episode of Will Trent, which is a brand new show this year. So still acting. He was a fun, grumpy guy. Just, man, that scene where O'Brien goes back to get his other suite, which we know the first scene was just to establish so that later, and I know I'm skipping ahead here, but the vendor's only in 2 scenes, so we're going to get rid of my vendor notes right off the bat. But how angry and violently Miles reacts. Does he put crack in the the lollipops? Is Miles addicted? Is that why he's there in the morning? Because O'Brien's ready to beat him up over it. And you think a grown, sane man, Starfleet officer, would be like, I'm disappointed, but I'm going to move on with my day, right?
Maybe it's 24th century caffeine, something in there.
I mean, he immediately understood the implication of what was happening there. And
but
well, Jimmy, I can tell you from personal experience, when you feel something like that happen, it makes you feel that way almost immediately.
Okay.
To have to deal with a person like that and have to, anyway. So
the implication.
Yeah, I probably don't have the frame of reference to. I probably don't have the frame of reference to really get into that. But
yeah, I'm sorry. I was laughing so hard. Stephen made an allusion to something else from a different show. It was a comedy. Just some people. I've been seeing references to that lately. It's, I guess, I don't know.
It's in the zeitgeist.
Yes.
So we're in the classroom. Keiko's teaching them about the first stable wormhole and the science behind it, which we knew it was the first stable wormhole. Interesting to hear. But in walks Vedic DeWin of the Wintis of Florida, comes in and says, no, you cannot teach this science in the classroom without the religious implication. And of course, Keiko is trying to be respectful, but saying, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're teaching what we're teaching. I did think some of her talking points, Keiko's talking points in this debate, were a bit too unthought through, I guess, a bit too superficial. So somebody comes into our classrooms now and demands we teach creationism or don't teach evolution. So her argument's held up for that argument. In this case, where the wormhole aliens are known to exist, it lends a certain amount of credence to the Bajoran religion that I don't think other religions have, because other religions are just based on bullcrap, whereas this, we actually know their gods are there. Like, we've seen them. We know they're there. And whether they are the way the Bajorans believe them to be or not is an entirely different matter. Yeah. But teaching that there are aliens in the wormhole that the Bajorans worship as gods, that's probably part of the science you can get into there, right?
Yes and no. I think there are some religions, I'm sure, that are based in something that they thought at the time might have lined up with something they were happened to interpret. And I'm sure there are also other elements that are cut out of whole cloth or are just all bull crap, as you were putting it. The problem with these kinds of debates, especially the time that it appeared on TV, is on TV. What was that with that emphasis? TV. Sorry. On television.
Television.
Yes, television.
Television.
The way that they couldn't attack religion in certain ways, even openly, even then, especially just on television because of the mainstreaming. But still, there are certain nuances in the discussion they couldn't quite get into, I guess, or maybe chose not to, or maybe didn't think through or have the, I guess, philosophical background to include in the script. But yeah, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. I'd have to go back and probably watch it again to think about this. But it's hard to tell which of the two were pushing for that either or argument more heavily. Because it seemed, I think both were just sort of like digging in their heels and insisting it become that kind of false dichotomy.
I mean, Wynn was basically like, I don't care if you don't teach the religion, you just can't teach the things that are against our religion.
Well, that was
on its face is a reasonable argument. I'm not saying it was a reasonable argument, but on its face it appears to be a reasonable argument.
Well, all right. I mean, there was a very simple way to counter that, which they didn't get into. That you reminded me of that now. That is something that she said. It was she came in and said that you can't even talk about the science of this because that contradicts the religious interpretation, which it shouldn't. I mean, correct. That's something that she should have come back with immediately, but she didn't. So
yeah. While we're talking about Wynn, let's talk about the actress because we haven't. Louise Fletcher, best known for playing Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I still haven't seen. I need to see that.
Oh, okay. That's
Flowers in the Attic, Cruel Intentions, Virtuosity, so many more things. To preserve some of the surprise going forward, I'm not going to tell you how many episodes either her or Bareil are in. I'm just going to tell you they're both in multiple seasons.
Thank you.
I'll leave it at there. But she will be in a lot of episodes. We'll get her developed very well, and I love her. And what a great introduction! Immediately fully formed. I feel like the Wynn we get in her final episode is still the Wynn we're meeting right now. Like it is all there.
I love that we jump right into Louise Fletcher. We don't even. She's there right off the bat.
She needs no introduction.
But why is she touching all these kids?
I forgot about. Yeah, I wish I'd written that down, but it's just
the whole episode. She's touching the kids. I'm like, what is going on here?
She's a very. She's one of those religious leaders that has to keep laying hands on her followers. I think it gives them that physical connection. I think we could delve into the political reasons why touch makes a more meaningful connection and probably better develops loyal following for her.
Not with my son, I'll tell you that right now.
I think it's part of her machinations. I think it's part of her strategy.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. My first thought when I saw that was it was a power play. She comes in the body language is, this is one of my people right here. I'm tenderly, whether I know this child or not, we have that familiarity already.
Yeah.
But if any of us went into a classroom and did that, we'd be in jail.
And rightfully so,
we're shot now that there's,
Oh, that too. Yeah.
Trapped.
By a kid or a teacher?
Good.
Well, teacher, hopefully. I mean, that's the proper order of things. The teacher should have the guns, right? So that will fix everything.
I mean,
should, but
Yeah. So we go back and we get a scene of O'Brien with his work wife, Neela. And they're razzing each other. And he's like, us old folks like to feel useful, even though he's not old at all. And it was so over the top ridiculous trying to build this dynamic between them. It's a shame we only had her for 2 episodes, that she was briefly in the last one, because I feel I guess that she had a different assistant for a couple episodes earlier in the season, and they had hoped that would be the same character throughout, which would have been more interesting. But then I feel like they had to force a relationship between the two of them too, so that we wouldn't suspect her, even though I don't know if you guys picked up on this, maybe because I was looking for it because I knew there was something about her that was off. She's in the background of every scene, and the camera frequently lingers on her. Not every scene literally, but she is constantly in the backgrounds of scenes she probably shouldn't be in. And
in this episode?
In this episode. Okay. She is there throughout and frequently like shooting looks and making sure she's listening, to the point where I'm like, yeah, this is so foreshadowed that she's a bad guy.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised either. And it was kind of like, oh, that's why they set this up, this whole thing. Yeah. But kind of a bummer, but still not uninteresting. But
I was more surprised than I should have been, or if I think if I'd been paying closer attention, like watching visually, I don't think I really saw them lean into it, of course, until when we were really supposed to see it, on the promenade where.
Oh, there was an ops scene I know where Brian was talking to Cisco, where she just seemed way too interested in their conversation. I mean, you can't do it with Kira, so you need to do it with another Bajoran, and establishing her, you want her to be established, right? So that you actually feel something when she turns.
Right.
I don't feel like they had enough of a chance to really establish her. I think they do a similar thing with other characters down the line in this show that works really well. I think with her, it was kind of rushed and forced. And I don't think that's entirely the production's fault. If that other character was meant to be her, they could have continued it better, but acting and contracts and things, that's unfortunate. We go back to the school debate. Kira agrees with Wynn to Cisco and says maybe there should be 2 schools, like the Hebrew school, after the public school or whatever, to teach the religion. And I don't think that's a terrible idea. You could teach the religion in the Sunday school and teach the regular thing in the other. What I do object to, what I think Kira's implying, though, is yes, we should have a Bajoran school and a non-Bajoran school, not like a secondary school that you go to sometime. And that kind of segregation, I think, would quickly spiral in a way we don't want it to. That's separate but equal. Is the curriculum actually going to be up to standards for the Bajoran children? I mean, not that we know that Keiko's holding anything up to any standards. Is she filing with the Federation and has to live up to their standards? We don't know. But
I wrote this Bajoran hardline nonsense makes me A, like the Cardassians more, and B, like Kira less. Now, I feel like she gets redeemed at the end because she kind of comes around to not be as hardline. So I suppose that's why they set her up here, so she can come to the middle or whatever. But
Kira has already been dealing with similar things throughout the season, and I appreciate that. Like, she was pretty hardline in the pilot. And as things have unfolded, she's had to adjust her thinking. And I think this episode helps display that. In fact, not to get to the final scene yet, we'll talk about that when we get to it, but I really think this episode does a decent job of building a Kira growth arc over the course of the season and paying it off.
Right. since you mentioned that, you made me made me realize a couple of things about that. I think what had been bothering me about the other setup episodes like these for Kira, I think they always seem satisfying, but at the same time they're a little frustrating because it seems like they always kind of start from square one. So it's like we're seeing the same sort of path laid out, but sort of like overlaid from the same starting point to the same ending point each time. I mean, it's like a little bit further, but I feel like in some other more serialized, like contemporary serialized shows, we wouldn't have to start as far back.
I agree with you, Keith, but I also think a 2 steps forward, 1 step back approach is pretty realistic. And I think Kira's a pretty realistically written character. Yeah. I think sometimes some of these modern shows, to keep the story moving, let the growth stay too solid, and the backslide is pretty realistic to me. Especially because it's not all about, I mean, her starting point on this episode is certainly not the same as her starting point at the beginning of the season. True. But you're right that there has been, like, in Duet, for instance, it seemed like she had gone further back than you might expect, but again, based on the context of the situation, I could see her sliding back. So,
I think it might have felt like that to me too, because it was the two episodes back to back where they essentially did that. Yeah,
that makes sense. Wynn meets Cisco and she grabs his ear, which Kayapaka grabbed his ear, but it seems so much different when Wynn does it, when Vedic Wynn does it versus Kayapaka.
I thought. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to point out another power play there, and something that tends to happen. Yeah, the power play of, and this is something that happens in real life all too often. You're in social interactions. You have certain people who do like to sort of like a fake request for permission or consent, where they're already on the way to doing it. Is it okay if I do this?
Yeah.
And you don't really have the option of saying no. This makes me uncomfortable. It's just sort of like it's happening now. Hands already there. You would have to like.
I can't wait for season 4 when they meet to her, and all the inappropriate touching comes back to bite her in the butt.
Well, they explain the ear thing, right? Don't they say something about
that's how she can read his pod, his soul? Yeah.
I thought it was also interesting because it made me think of. I don't see this happen that much now, except for when I ask people to do it when I'm directing them. But grabbing someone by the ear and pulling them seems like something we see in a Catholic school.
And I think it's
right.
And it did not when Apaka did it, but it did when Wynn did it. I thought the same thing. The grabbing the kid by the ear. If she would grab Quark's ear, that's like grabbing him by the testicles, right?
My pog is involved in that. What you're talking about.
In the discussion with Fedek, what was the other one? The one on the Brile, yes. In the garden, I think they really leaned into the whole Catholic school interpretation of that, or the parallels to it. When he mentioned the monk that did that to him, it made it sound like that was punitive in some way. Like he was actually grabbing it to, talk about the grip. So I don't know.
I think you're right, Keith.
It confused me a little bit.
Wynn calls Cisco a disbeliever. I don't think she needed to grab his ear to know that he didn't believe in the prophets. I think that's been pretty well established. Wynn says in this initial conversation with Cisco that she would do anything to look into their eyes. And I think if you didn't know that she's a bad guy yet, by that line, you have to know she's a bad guy, right?
Hey, speaking of Fletcher, in my one fashion note, is she wearing a replica of the Sydney Opera House on her? Is that what her hat is?
I feel like we see other major religious people wear similar headdresses. It's the style, yeah.
Also, just
they're great appreciators of the arts. I'm sorry.
Clearly, and the arts from down under. Between this, and obviously this is only one episode, and Nurse Ratched, obviously one of the greats, is Louise Fletcher. She's got to be one of the great villainesses of all time. And is villainess a thing now, or are they just villains?
I would just say villains.
Yeah, she's one of the great villains. Ratched is. And,
I agree.
And I know there's I've seen reinterpretations that Ratched isn't a villain in that movie. That she's and they kind of make sense to me. So I feel like I want to go back and watch it and be like, oh, you know what? Maybe she isn't the villain. I mean, she's not necessarily the good guy, but she's not necessarily a villain. She's just doing her job. And but anyway, now that's a different podcast altogether.
Well, even if we don't do it in this break, like I said, she's going to be around for seasons. So I'll add it to our list of possible bonus episodes down the road.
And I guess maybe that's the thing. She makes you mad, like she made me mad in this episode. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I'm attracted to and I'm impressed with her. So maybe that's just me also. We've talked about this on this podcast as well. So
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was attracted to her, but I love her the way she plays the character.
yeah,
I'm not complaining about that.
sure.
Well, Cisco tells Wynn she says she can't be responsible for the consequences if Keiko doesn't retreat or give in. That right there is so foreshadowing that something bad's going to happen. And I feel like at that point, Cisco should go ahead and say, I'm going to hold you responsible. Because later it's like, well, I can't pin it to you. I can't really get anything on you. But if at this point he'd said, I'm going to hold you responsible, I think that changes. I guess he's trying to play it cool diplomatically, but I mean, basically her and Belial are like their head bishops from the planet, like two of the top bishops, in their church. So I guess that's what Vedic means, right? Bishop and Kai is Pope,
That makes sense.
essentially.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
I'm sorry, was Cisco present when she made that sort of foreshadowing statement or that kind of veiled threat, I suppose?
I think so, but maybe not. The way I wrote that note, it seems like it was a takeoff of the Cisco note, but maybe it's different.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I remember it one way or the other, but I'm just, I was using that to preface my opinion that I don't think he would have had enough to act on to escalate by saying something like that. I think that would probably have.
That's true. He doesn't know how devious she is yet.
Yeah, or lent justification to future action, even if he had suspected that meant something.
Mm-hmm. So we find out there's a missing tool from O'Brien's toolkit, and he never misplaces his tool. But like right after that, we find out there's a missing ensign. Anybody for a second not think the two are connected? Because immediately I'm like, yeah, duh.
Well, they aren't watching the show. I sometimes like to remind myself of that when I see characters do things like that, because
That's true.
In real life, I jump to those kinds of conclusions, but they're usually not. They're usually premature.
Well, I mean, it's presented as a B plot, and then the missing ensign could even be like a C plot, but there is only an A plot in this story. And I did like that it seemed like there was a B plot with a missing tool and a missing ensign that ended up tying in. I appreciated that it all tied together. There was they found organic material when they searched for the ensign, and it's like, yep, she made an oopsie and died, was their first thought. Like, yeah, she just made a mistake. That brings us back to the Junja stick scene where the vendor refuses service, and O'Brien, coming out of that, considers resigning from Deep Space Nine, and Keiko has to talk him out of it. That seemed, again, maybe I don't have the context, but that seems like a major overreaction to me. Is it? It's kind of hard to tell what Keith thinks because I can't see his face. He's just a cartoon.
I was going to say that I don't think it seemed warranted to me at the time. Again, this is sort of like boiling over to being like a clearly hostile environment for him and especially his wife. She was at the forefront of this sort of conflict, and this probably demonstrated the sort of danger that she might be in if she decided to stay. The school might, any number of things could have happened there. I think he was thinking about that and saying, you don't have to deal with this.
This was before the school blew up. This was just her harassing. And I feel like as Starfleet officers, the answer is not to turn tail and run. It's to stay and fight for their beliefs and their values, right?
It might have been an emotional reaction in the moment, but I'm saying I don't think it was that blown out of proportion. Basic consideration would have at least been to get her opinion about that. And joke, I think it was. Glad you brought that up because at the time I kind of jokingly thought to myself, of course, this is they're finally giving her a story arc. Why would you want to leave? She wouldn't want to have to go and reestablish it in some new place. But yeah.
So then we get Wynn coming back, and she starts out by praising Keiko and forgiving Miles.
Oh, I love it.
She admires Keiko's convictions. That's when she says, "Well, just don't teach the wormhole at all as a compromise."
Right.
And she's so deliciously, because of the way she plays it, I feel like to a casual viewer who may not have the full context of the story, if you're just a Jimmy-Jerome walking down the corridor and you hear her interacting with them, she can come across as somebody that's sympathetic and not a villain. But taken all together, all of her comments through the episode, you're like, no, she's definitely a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, but that's I think this was around the point of the episode where I was really starting to get on board. Just the way those interactions are starting to play out. The similar interactions between the major players is going forward. It's really started to bring back the things I was liking about Cisco's character this time through. That I think the nuances were lost on me for a long time, really, until I think this viewing. Just those fun little innuendos, for I guess for lack of a better word, not sexuals, of course, but just alternate meanings for what they're saying as they say them. They're just the knowing glances, the careful kinds of just they have to play it up just enough, sort of, it gets through the camera to everyone, but
yeah,
it's I like the way that goes.
Yeah, speaking of Cisco, you mentioned him being a diplomat earlier. When he talks with Jake, is he practicing both sidesism?
No, I don't think so, honestly. I think he's being a good parent. He may personally disagree with Wynn, but you have to teach your kids to consider and weigh arguments. Yes. And I think by leading Jake to make his own conclusions based on reason and not just dismissing people out of hand, I don't. Cisco doesn't strike me as a particularly religious character, but he does respect faith. And him saying, faith isn't dumb. I understand why they needed it through the occupation to get them through, that's what gave them hope. And I really liked that. I don't think that's both sidesism. I think that's just challenging Jake to be a better person overall.
I still like Jake's two of his questions to Cisco.
About Galileo.
One, how could anyone be so stupid? And two, are you serious? So I've never liked Jake more.
It's a good scene, I thought.
It is.
That's the way that I feel most of the time, actually, when things like that happen. And Cisco's perspective. I can be upset about something happening, and when I'm actually talking it through, and somebody says something like that just immediately and it makes me reflexively think about it for a moment and go, wait, well, I understand why the person would think this. And start to weigh those sorts of things. But it's not even just, I think, like Starfleet principles, for example. That's the sort of thing that they would need to understand in order to advance, just from a very pragmatic sense. But that is intolerance in a way.
Yes and no. I think right now on our planet Earth in the 21st century, it's reasonable to say, like, hey, you can study religion and realize it's all based on bullcrap. Mm-hmm. From a societal perspective, we don't have to necessarily give that as much weight. Whereas the Bajorans, that there's reason to give their religion weight, I feel like, over modern religions on Earth.
My response to you guys on that is, and it's a very nuanced response, is how can anyone be so stupid?
So Cisco goes down to try to get another Vedic on his side. Bareil, who is the leading candidate for Kai, we're told, wins the dark horse, the long shot. He's the favorite. And this part of Bajor looks really intact. The Cardassians not messed with, not just the close-up, but the wide shot.
I like that,
the map painting. I was like, why did the Cardassians spare this part? I don't feel like they would. That, to me, actually felt wrong. But that's when Bareil talks about his opinion on the ear-grabbing being unpleasant, and maybe they should get it out. They also talk a little about fear justifying things. Mm-hmm. And Bareil played by Philip Anglim, who's best known for Haunted Summer, The Thornbirds, the 1980s miniseries that John Delancey was in, The Elephant Man, the 1982 film, and this role in DS9. He actually has 15 credits, other than a Dallas TV movie in 1998. His arc on DS9 was his last acting job. Oh, wow. So I don't know why, because it looked like he'd been acting for about 20 years before this, but he seems to have gone away after this. He was nominated for an Emmy at one point, so it's not because he's a lackluster actor. Well, he was nominated for an Emmy for The Elephant Man because he was the lead actor. Golden Globe and Emmy. Yeah. But the end of Bareil's conversation, as reasonable as he seems, as much you're like, yeah, he's on our side, he then shows that he's about the politics too, because he's like, yeah, I agree with you, but I can't publicly agree with you because that could hurt my chances to become Kai. And I'm like, whoa, okay. His whole maybe I can help you more once I become Kai was so political.
It is, but what else would he do in those circumstances?
I'm not saying he's a bad man for staking that position. I'm not. I'm really not. It's just the game of politics is dirty.
Yeah.
As far as we know, at least at this point, he's trying to succeed in politics for laudable goals to help people. So
I guess that's what the point I was about to get to there is just, you can say the politics are dirty, but I don't think the way he's approaching it is necessarily dirty or makes him dirty for trying to do that.
No, but at the same time, you also want you want somebody that stands by their convictions and can be the same in private and in public, I think, in terms of leadership. And I know that's not how politics works. And so it's a little bit disheartening to me, even though it feels super realistic for him to be like held up as this good guy and the opposite of win, but then still put politics over morals.
I suppose. I'm just, I guess the other thought that occurs to me is, how useful could he be if he weren't pragmatic enough to make that decision there? I mean, if he just flies off the handle and just starts charging in there and tanks things or makes things worse or erodes his own power in the process, then he's not going to be able to help at all.
Well, and I wasn't saying that to besmirch him. I'm saying that to besmirch politics. Right. Like the fact that you can't just do the right thing and rely on that to get you through.
Right.
Sucks.
Yeah.
Hate the game, not the player.
Right. I don't hate
some of the players. I think some of the players made the game the way that it is.
I don't hate Morale, and I certainly do not hate Louise Fletcher, even if I might hate Win. I love to hate Win. Is that a thing? That's a thing.
Like hate winning? Like winning out of spite?
I'm so tired of the winning. She's making Bejorn great again so much. The Bejorns are not reporting to work on the station.
Yeah, that's where I was going next. Yep.
Yeah.
They're doing a sick out. And Kira and Sisko are having a conversation. She says, I thought there was room for all philosophies on the station. And I was just like, you're really stretching the definition of philosophy.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Do you think Sisko's in the right by saying, yeah, Kira, you're not supporting me enough. You need to get on this, which I think is a separate conversation to, is he in the right by saying these people have to get back to work or they're fired? Two separate conversations.
I'm sorry, what was the first one?
Sisko accuses Kira of not being supportive enough as first officer, personally supportive enough. He thinks she should be, I mean, she's still reporting to work, but she thinks he thinks she should be cracking down on the Bejorn workers.
Right. I think I'm definitely with Sisko on this. Yeah. I don't know that I don't know that he's right that she's not been supportive enough, but I think he's being very, very specific on this very specific point. But yeah,
I think telling him to get back to work is reasonable. Yeah. Accusing Kira of personal loyalty failings, I took that a little rougher.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that was probably I wouldn't say overreaction necessarily, but certainly not something that is reasonable in very much the same way of the political nuances we were talking about before. I mean, she can be supportive, but at a certain point, again, she would probably erode her usefulness in that sense if she were to just go flying off the handle with these other Bejorns.
Well, he ties it to the progress they've made in the 7 months, so he's kind of like, this could ruin everything that we've worked for or whatever.
And I think she understands that, and I think she's trying to balance the situation. And for him to say, you're not being tough enough, feels not good to me. Like, he should be able to be the bad cop and let her off the hook, because that works better for their dynamic overall anyway.
Yes. Yep. What was the second thing?
Is he right in saying the Bejorns either get back to work or they're fired? I think, yeah. It's not the same thing as like, it's not the same thing as like striking for a union. This is different. This is
This is we're kind of irritated about this. We're kind of taking this other side, so we're going to show our displeasure by just not showing up to work and being passive aggressive about it, and that's just no.
Neela tells O'Brien, "You don't put on any airs, like him or not like O'Brien. I don't think he does put on airs."
Right.
Yeah, he's sort of the space kind of person.
I was thinking about that. I'm sorry. Something similar about his character. I can see a lot of his appeal in that kind of sense of the just the practicality of things. I want to say charmingly simple, but that seems a little bit too insulting. Right. It's there's something endearing about the way that he doesn't seem to quite grasp certain kinds of social interactions immediately, but not necessarily in an obstinate way or a way that is dense. It's just sort of like he isn't accustomed to thinking of things in that way, and then just
Odo is investigating
the
murder, because now we know it's a murder.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the 6th murder on the station in 19 episodes, isn't it? Like, a lot of people keep getting murdered.
Alleged murder at this point.
Okay, fair. It really rubbed me the wrong way that Odo immediately started referring to the murderer as a he, and kept referring to the murderer as a he before they knew nothing, which we later, of course, find out it's a female. So I feel like that was to throw us off the track as writing staff, but at the same time, I feel like Odo knows better. And yes, the first 5 of the 6 murders this season have been committed by men, but there's no reason for him to jump to that conclusion at this point.
There is a pattern.
I mean, men tend to be more violent.
Yeah.
Women are more like Win. They get other people to do their dirty work. No, I'm just kidding. That was really sexist. And I don't really believe that. I was trying to believe it. That joke. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that when you brought up the Odo investigation. One thing I liked about this episode is it was a good way to just, I would say apart from Dax, I think everybody got a little something to do to give a little, this is a fun way to look at what they do well on the station. These are things you liked about how they were working from earlier things. And I guess this was a very good reflection of how they didn't really have anything for Dax.
So are you saying that Odo is very good at investigating murders? He's just not very good at preventing them?
Perhaps. But
yeah, I think we'll talk a lot more about Dax in our season wrap-up.
Very reactionary.
Sure.
I would say that no one is really good at preventing murders, actually, but
I mean, there are ways to prevent some murders, like giving mental health assistance and keeping guns out of the hands of people who are spouse abusers.
No, you can't
we
prove
need the
that.
good guys to have guns because that's the best thing to stop a bad guy.
We can't prove that keeping guns out of the hands of abusive people prevents murders. I think there's plenty of stats, and the good guy with the gun thing, I'm pretty sure, has been disproven as well by statistics and science.
Everybody needs to have a gun.
Yeah, stats, numbers. I'm not going to read all that.
My religious belief is that guns are awful and should be banned. That's my philosophy.
And the way to express that is just to not show up to work, I think.
I think that's a great idea.
I guess that would be fair if you actually worked for like a gun manufacturer of some sort, or that 3-letter organization. I probably shouldn't even.
The NRA.
All right, we're dead. We're all dead now.
Screw the NRA. I don't care if that's on Patreon. I would have said F, but I guess on Patreon we can cuss. So fuck the NRA. It's gonna be cut from the podcast anyway.
Yep, we're definitely dead now.
All complaints get addressed to Keith and I. No.
And I will give you the political answer, the Burrell answer, for whatever's happening there.
When Odo's interviewing Quark, and Quark gets sadly little to do this episode, but he's had some this season. Quark says keeping your ears open is the 7th rule of acquisition.
Yeah.
We're getting more of those rules of acquisition now about the profits.
Yeah. Well, the thing I was saying before about everyone getting like something, it was like a very condensed example of those things, because I think this, as you said, the A story took up everything, even though they implied it wasn't.
Right. But, The school is then bombed. Man, that is a tiny fire hose they bring to put that fire out. It's like the size of, it's like the width of a garden hose. Is their fire suppressant that good in the 24th century? They don't need like a big fire hose?
You beat me to the answer right there. That's it. It's like they have little cell phones now. They can just smaller computers, smaller fire extinguishers. That's how it works.
Cisco holds Wynn responsible for the bombing explicitly, like not arresting her, but saying this is your fault, which is great. But then Wynn responds by saying Cisco and the Federation have no soul, which I think is a bit much.
I think I laughed about this hard.
Yeah,
when she said that too. It's just lots of fun things happening as far as the politics of it.
That whole scene where Cisco makes some assumptions, though, where he's in front of all these Bajoran officers. He's like, we have some damn good fights, me and the Bajorans, but in the end, we're moving forward stronger. And I don't know why, maybe this is modern sensibilities. I kind of expected him to look at the Bajorans and go, right? Am I right? Aren't we moving forward?
I thought he did.
For his credit. He's making some assumptions. I don't think they're unfair assumptions, to his credit. And I think it probably helps his esteem in the Bajoran officers that witnessed the scene's eyes that he doesn't question it, that he is like, no, I value these people. We have fights and then we move forward. I think it's a great example of Cisco's leadership ability, even though I'm like, ooh, you're making assumptions there. Let's double check that. But at the end of that scene, of course, you get the nod between Wynn and Neela, which if you had any doubts,
and that is
not only is Neela bad, but that she's working for Vedic Wynn. There you go.
When it became obvious that it was Neela every time they were investigating, stuff. Who coming up with like, oh, somebody set up the computer program, blah blah blah. I just kept saying to myself, Mila, like Seinfeld says.
Like Newman, yeah.
Yep.
Is it because you kept seeing her in the scenes as they were saying it too?
Well, yeah, that's. Well, I didn't. I'm bummed that I missed that.
Same.
Go back and rewatch this episode. Unmute, fast forward. You'll see her.
Yeah.
She's in like 15 scenes, and for the amount of lines she has, it's crazy.
I do remember seeing her in the background in one early on. Yeah.
I thought the nod was subtle enough that if you were drinking and casually watching, you might have missed it, but obvious enough if you were paying attention, it's definitely there.
Yeah.
Bareil then comes to the station to publicly claim Sisko as a friend, because I feel like, again, if we want to make it politics, because I think it has to be politics, once there's a bombing, I think he sees an opportunity to make himself look good and Wynn look bad.
That's the 8th rule of acquisition.
The rules of acquisition, like I said, I've got the book that lists all the ones that are officially seen on screen, which of course is not all of them. There's a lot of numbers missing, but they're very interesting. You should look through them. I recommend them. I love the back-to-back rules. One of the rules of acquisition is war is good for business, and the very next rule is peace is good for business. I love that.
Yes.
There's definitely contradictions in the rules of acquisition.
Which is yeah, all right. You probably get the point, but I do love the...
I love the Ferengi in DS9. The Ferengi in Next Gen suck. The Ferengi in DS9 are great. But...
Well, actually, all right, I just thought of a way to think about that, really. It's just that it seems comically contradictory, but it is true in the sense of the extremes. Or rather, it points out that war, the state of being at war and the state of being at peace are really just designations. They're somewhat arbitrary and branded for those purposes. That's what the governments are using to motivate whatever. I mean, to put forth and justify whatever they're doing. Therefore, there is profit to be made upon those kinds of endeavors. So.
Sure. Stephen, I think, talked about Wynn touching everybody as she walks in the classroom. I don't know if you noticed, as soon as Bareil got off his shell in DS9, he picks up a kid. Like immediately he's carrying a child down the promenade.
So they're almost literally kissing babies. Yes.
I think for anybody who was not getting that this was actually more politics than religion, they had to hit it right on the head. Politics and religion in DS9 are certainly not separate things, nor are they in our real world. But I appreciate that. I appreciate the realism of the way the Bajoran religion, and the Bajoran religion is also really, I mean, it's not their government officially, but you got to think back to the days where all the kings in Europe were still answering to the Pope. I feel like the Bajoran civilian government still answers to the Kai and the religious order. So they have a lot of power. Neela tells Wynn they cut off my escape route. Wynn's like, that's awful. Now you have to be a martyr.
Yeah.
So many words, but yeah. She's like, I guess the prophets just want you to be a martyr.
Yes. Yes.
Well, doesn't she say it's the way of the prophets, right?
It's in the hands of the prophets.
In the hands of, I mean, it's just like this, like, well, it's God's will. What can you do?
You made me think of a note that I wish that I had taken, which luckily reminded me of it. Back during Sisko's discussion with Jake, he came so close to saying it, but didn't actually say it. He said it was like a matter of the way that you look at it, or a matter of something that
something to do with the P.
It was very.
He didn't say the exact word, and I was
he didn't. Just like I don't think anyone in this episode actually says "in the hands of the prophets," but they get close a few times.
He says it's a matter of interpretation.
Yes, there we are.
Same thing.
So close.
I mean, that is his perspective. So
there we go. We got it.
Did you notice when Bareil and Wynn first come face to face in this episode? Wynn reaches for his ear and he smacks her hand away.
Yes.
It's like Trump trying to reach for Melania's hand. It's great. O'Brien figures out Neela, and his first reaction, which I thought was very appropriate, was shame. He reported her to Sisko, but you could tell he felt ashamed reporting her, that I should have caught this earlier. And she sabotaged the weapons detectors. So that's of course, as soon as you find out that she sabotaged the weapons detectors on the promenade, you're like, yep, there's somebody on the grassy knoll in the promenade with a gun.
I don't say sabotaged. I say sabotaged.
I know you don't. When O'Brien alerts Sisko, he sees Neela. He sees her like getting out the gun. and everything goes into slow motion, and he gets a no. And I appreciated all that because it was fun and it was appropriate. What I did not appreciate is he's nowhere near her when she actually shoots. And her shot is so far off. Like, you pick an assassin that has some decent aim, right?
Yeah, it reminded me of The Waterboy. Every tackle that Adam Sandler makes in The Waterboy is like him jumping 5 feet in the air and tackling the person, which doesn't make sense. But it was funnier than that. In this, to me, it was more the Austin Powers, where he's like, no. That's a good analogy too. He's still got plenty of time to move. I think Siska should have been closer and should have actually moved her arm. Yeah. I mean, not only does it deny your captain character, no, he's not a captain, he's a commander, but you deny your captain character a heroic moment. Kirk would have tackled her before she fired. But it also just doesn't make a lot of sense that she was that off. And then he'd have been like, "Oh, I didn't see the phaser." I mean, I think the other,
I seem to recall. Wait a second. I seem to remember something blocking her shot. I think something hit her arm before as she was firing.
What?
I thought that was him.
No, he wasn't near her. He didn't get to tackle her till well after she fired. I feel like he should have tackled Barial because that's who he was near.
That does make more sense. That's what I actually thought when I saw the shot. You're explaining. That's why I was perceiving it. I was kind of looking away, whatever. I perceived it as him diving for Barial, and we looked up and saw that suddenly he was tackling her, and I was a little confused. But I remember at the time it looked like something made her arm move upward. I don't know if somebody blocked her or if the surprise announcement distracted her or something.
I'm blaming the director, David Livingston, for not making it work. One of our regulars. The prophet spoke, and I answered the call, was her response when they arrest her. You cannot argue with religious fanatics. You just lock them up and throw away the key, right?
Before we move on, I just had to point out that David Livingston's middle name is Charles.
Okay.
Which is an important clue, don't you think? If you look at his initials.
DCL?
Yes. DC Livingston.
Oh, God. He's been married. As IMDb says, he's been married to Dorothy Livingston. That's DC Fontana's first name.
Is it really?
2013.
Oh, that's even more amazing. I was making up the middle thing. I have no idea what his middle name actually is.
I know, but I figured that out halfway through, Keith, but I love this conspiracy that you're weaving through with DC Fontana. I love it. Keep it up. Kira sees the Wynn's assassination plot, and she accuses Wynn outright of, "You did this. I know she was working for you," essentially. And Wynn just turns and leaves. She doesn't deny it, which I think is a mistake. I feel like she should probably say something like, "I have no idea what you're talking about," before she leaves. I don't know how I feel about that choice to not have her say anything, because I feel like her not saying anything confirms it. Whereas even if she says, "I don't know what you're talking about," to us it confirms it, but to a court of law it doesn't. I don't know. It just maybe Wynn's so smart. I mean, she is very clever. Maybe she's like, it's not going to matter what I say in this moment. But it still doesn't feel like it's missing a line. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the look was what was important there. It was like a moment of calculation, a moment of understanding, and just there's nothing you can do about it anyway. There's nothing I can say about it. I'm going to leave. Yeah. And I would think, and maybe this is a cliche, and maybe Stephen can confirm this for us, but the advice always is just to not say anything. I mean, why would I think any form of denial is putting yourself at some form of risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And Wynn is smart. She may have many of the same philosophies of Donald Trump, of selfishness and bigotry, but she is actually smart, unlike him. So, yeah. What she scares me, because it's like if Trump was clever and was elected, that would be so much more damaging. If she is, and I won't tell you whether her, Barial, or somebody else gets elected, Kai, but just her right now scares me. The potential of what she represents. They can't prove Wynn was involved, so she gets away with it, even though the audience, of course, knows it was her. I did appreciate Kira saying to Cisco, "You're right about the Bajorans. I don't think you're the devil," as a season-ending arc. For this episode itself, it was almost a bit much, but if you look at it as this is the last scene of the season, let's conclude this arc between the two of them where they start out so at odds.
Mhm.
And she's not saying, I agree with you and everything, or I support you fully. All she's saying is, I don't think you're the devil. I love that. It's a great progress.
Yeah, that last scene is really good. I opened by saying this was like ripped from the headlines. I think I know the answer, but did it feel too on target or on the nose?
I thought some of Keiko's dialogue was a little bit too heavy-handed and too much applicable to the modern situation and not applicable to the 24th century situation. That's what bothered me, I think. I think they didn't adapt it. They didn't go far enough in adapting it. And they probably did that to be like, you need to make sure you see the satire. It's like in the original series when they paint a guy half black and half white, and can you clearly not see he's black on the left side and white on the right side. At least that dialogue was adapted slightly.
Right.
But they're so hitting you on the head with the commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't really touch religion on TV at this point. So the fact that they did it at all was pretty impressive to me. But yeah, I thought they went a little too far on hitting that nail on the head with Keiko's dialogue. Should we blame Keiko or should we blame the writer of the episode?
The writer.
Robert Hewitt Wolf wrote it. We've talked about him before. This is the third. He's a producer on DS9, or will be after season 1. I don't think he's a producer yet. Yeah, he doesn't become a producer until season 4. He's a producer through season 4 and 5. But this is the third episode of DS9 he's written. He previously was credited as the teleplay by for Q-less, the Q Vash episode, and The Passenger, which was just a couple episodes after the Q, really early in the season. It was the criminal that was badly burned and dies in Bashir's arms, but the captor believes he's still alive, which was a tricky thing. I personally, this is, I guess, a little bit of spoiler into the ranking stuff, but I personally think this was his best of the 3. He will go on to write a bunch of other episodes, but he's actually a story editor for season 2. He does have a written by and a teleplay by, couple of them in season 2, but he's story editor for all of season 2 and executive editor for season 3 before he becomes a producer in season 4 and 5, but he wrote a lot of episodes. He's got story by Trials and Tribulations, which is a good one. He's got written by The Way of the Warrior, which is a great one. He's got a lot of good stuff, and they left the show for season 6 and 7, although he did contribute one script for the final season. So anyway, I like Robert Hewitt Wolf. I think I'm going to blame his misfires earlier in the season of just getting to know the characters in the show, because I think DS9 took a lot of time to find its spot. I think this episode's really good, and I can see why they'd want to staff him after this, even if we're going to blame him for the Keiko dialogue.
Right.
Who is your shady character of the episode? I feel like there's 2 choices.
When done.
Neela.
Was it really?
Was
it Neela, Stephen?
Yeah, she was lurking in the background all the time.
I think that's the second fair choice, but I have to go with Keith. I go for the brains behind the operation as the shady, and that's Win.
Yeah,
Plus Louise Fletcher. Come on, Vedic Win.
I had Neela as my annoying, and I just wrote down Fletcher for everything she did as my shady, and then I flipped them. So Fletcher ends up being my annoying.
You have Win. Vedic Win is your annoying.
That's my annoying. Yeah.
I went with Keiko because of the dialogue that we were just talking about. I'm sorry, the dialogue we were just talking about, I know that's not Rosalind Chow's fault, but it's certainly Keiko O'Brien's fault, right?
Like what specifically? Just the way that the arguments didn't seem to...
I'm only going to teach the science and your religion philosophy. And I'm like, yeah, but there's actually science that their prophets exist. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
It was too hardline for the situation as it existed.
And also, I mean, that's actually a valid topic. Just the existence of religions and their content should be fair.
And the fact that there's actually science supporting the Bajorn religion. Let's talk about that. You in college level, upper levels, maybe some high school, certainly not my high school, but college. I took a class on religions.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
It's legit to teach religions in certain circumstances in the right context. And I feel like if there's ever been a context to bring religion into the earlier grades, it's the fact that these wormhole aliens live right here and this whole planet believes they're gods.
Yeah. I think it's a very simple thing to say. We discovered these beings here. She was saying at the top of the episode, actually.
Yeah.
We've entities.
Daxon's just good discovered.
And the Bajorans believe this. They believe this. That's it, period.
And I know Wynn's going to be offended by that. Like
Right.
that, saying that is not enough for Wynn. But that's what Keiko's perspective should have been. And she went too hard line the other way, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that's why she's my annoyance. Keith, who's your annoyance?
Wow. I'm still Win. Yeah.
Wynn? She's too shady to annoy me. Plus, I love Louise Fletcher. I was not annoyed by her at all. I ate up every scene she was in.
No,
Who are we
actually, I'm
drinking with?
going to change it. I'm going to change it to the Junja vendor.
That's right. I was going to
That
throw
is
that
a
out
great
there.
choice.
Yeah.
I was going to throw that out there. Yeah.
Vendor is, it crossed my mind, certainly. So, who are we having a drink with?
Louise Fletcher.
Not
Baral.
Wynn, Louise Fletcher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wynn probably doesn't drink. I don't know that for sure. I'm just saying she seems like the type.
Yeah.
Baral.
Barile is a
Yeah.
good choice. I do like Barile as much as I'm not excited for him going forward the way I am for Wynn. I do like Barile, and I do like his story arc as well.
I loved the interplay and the video call. Thank you for your invitation, Commander Cisco. That whole thing, just that.
Now, without spoiling anything, they will develop him as a character. He won't just be, hey, this is the straight-laced medic that's a politician, but is cool. They will develop him further as a person and as a man, and not just a medic. That's why I love DS9. I'm gonna go with O'Brien. I feel like he needs a drinking buddy. He can't go home to Keiko because she's freaking annoying right now, and hasn't been around anyway.
Yeah.
And then he also found out his work wife, who is probably having an affair with, is evil. So I think he's going to need a drinking buddy at Quark's. And then Quark's going to listen to us because he's keeping his ears open because that's the 7th rule of acquisition.
Right. The time period that this episode came out in. How we were saying that we wouldn't have thought of it as necessarily a bad marriage when we were watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And the writers probably didn't either. These are just cute things that sort of happen. Maybe it leads to something happening or not, but this is very common, and it's just a sign of the society and toxic monogamy. Essentially, those are the signs of that, which makes it very difficult for relationships to last anyway. And so, but to them, this is normal, and that's what our country is like. This is what is normal. So, those sorts of things can happen all the time. Emotional affairs and distances,
emotional affairs are necessarily cheating. I think it depends on where you take them.
Well, I guess that's my point. Is that term in itself is something that is created by that sort of system to shame people into you can't possibly need anyone else other than this other person. If you're doing something's wrong, et cetera, et cetera.
Ranking the episode, better or worse than Emissary? I'm gonna say better. I'm just gonna jump right out in front.
Yeah, I was kind of up there. I wasn't sure. I just
can't fight it. I mean, I could, but I'd lose.
That's tough. I feel like the actual interactions with the entities might put it over for me. I might put this just a little bit under.
Interesting. So Steven and I are going above, and Keith's going down. Above Emissary is Duet.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. That's fair. That should be up there.
I mean, the reason I started the ranking is my personal opinion is In the Hands of the Prophets is number 2 for the season underneath.
It's about the right area, I think.
Yeah. Number 2.
Okay. Keith would have gone below Emissary. Would you have gone below the Negus?
I think it's pretty comparable. This is more about the scope of the political landscape there and within the series and the world building and so forth. But
this is a lot of world building, though. I mean, Barile and Wynn, their election is a major component of season 2.
Right. Well, I'm saying without that knowledge, I think they're pretty comparable.
Right.
For what's being established.
I thought of that episode while watching and reading and thinking about this episode. Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. Would you put it maybe slightly above Negus, below Emissary?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're all in the same range, roughly. You're like one episode below where we put it. So next week, we're going to wrap up season 1, have our complete season discussion. I've got a lot to say about our complete season discussion. I think there's a lot of, I feel like when we wrapped up Next Gen 2 weeks ago, or last week, as this podcast comes up, there wasn't a lot to say because you get to season 6 and the show stops being
a little lackluster.
Yeah. Whereas I feel like this being the first season and also there's just a lot to talk about. So I'm excited. Next week we'll wrap up season 1. Until then, live long.
6 seasons and no movie and prosper.
Well, it's all
7 seasons and no movie.
It's in the hands of the prophets.
It's even more.
Whether we live. Maybe we have to take the fall for this one. Sorry.
Is what I meant to say. 6 more seasons and no movie.
Yeah, whether
there's still time to make a movie. We need a movie.
So far, yeah, you're right.
Whether we're assassinated by some political organization in this country is just in the hands of the prophets at this point.
Tequila.
It's All Been Done presents.
Who's got the time?